The hut smelled of fresh palm oil and bitter herbs, and I could hear Mbokpo crying softly inside. Her sobs were muffled, as though she was trying not to let anyone hear, but in the stillness of the night, even whispers carried far incantation. I stood outside, my heart thumping, clutching the clay pot of water I had fetched from the stream. I was too young to understand everything, but I knew one thing: Mbokpo didn't want to be in that hut. I had seen the women drag her there that morning, her arms flailing, her legs kicking up dust as she screamed for her mother. The entire village gathered to watch, their faces blank, as if this was just another normal day. But for Mbokpo, it wasn't. She was now the pregnant Mbokpo, though she wasn't truly pregnant. It was just what they called girls like her, ready for marriage, hidden away to be fattened and polished until they looked like queens. They said it was tradition. They said it was necessary. For weeks, Mbokpo would stay in that hut. The women fed her bowls of pounded yam, thick with palm oil, and soup swimming with bush meat. They rubbed her skin with shea butter until it shone in the sun. They braided her hair in patterns that looked like the rivers that ran through the forest. They said she must look her best when the men came to choose. But Mbokpo didn't want to be chosen. I remember the first time I spoke to her. It was the second week, and the women were gone, leaving her to rest. I crept to the hut, peeking through the gap in the raffia walls. She sat on the floor, her back against the wall, staring at nothing. Her face looked like the sky before a storm, heavy and dark. "Mbokpo," I whispered. She turned sharply, her eyes wide with fear, but when she saw it was me, her face softened. "What are you doing here, Item? You'll get in trouble." "I brought you water," I said, holding up the pot. Her lips quivered, and for a moment, I thought she would cry again. But she didn't. She reached out, her hands trembling, and took the pot from me. "Thank you," she whispered. We sat in silence for a while, the only sound the distant chirping of crickets. Then she spoke, her voice low and shaky. "Do you think it's fair, Item? That they can just lock me up here? That they can decide my life for me?" I didn't know what to say. I was only 10, and to me, the ways of the village were as unchangeable as the rising of the sun. "It's our tradition," I mumbled. Her laugh was bitter, like the taste of unripe fruit. "Tradition," she spat. "Is it tradition to take away my freedom? To make me marry a man I don't even know?" I wanted to tell her it would be okay, that she would be happy, but the words felt wrong in my mouth. Even at my age, I could see her pain, her anger, and her fear. The weeks dragged on, and Mbokpo grew more beautiful, just as the women had promised. Her skin glowed, her cheeks were round and full, and her laughter, though rare, sounded like music. But I knew it was all a mask. Inside, she was still the girl who had cried that first night, the girl who wanted something more than what the village had planned for her. The day the suitors came, the entire village gathered in the square. Mbokpo stood in the middle, dressed in a wrapper of the finest fabric, her hair adorned with beads. The men looked at her like she was a prize, a treasure to be claimed. But when they asked her to kneel before her chosen suitor, she did something no one expected. She stood tall, her voice clear and steady. "I will not marry," she said. "Not like this." The crowd gasped, the elders muttered, and the women who had prepared her looked horrified. But Mbokpo didn't waver. She turned and walked away, her head held high, leaving the suitors and the village in stunned silence. That night, I heard my parents whispering about what had happened. They said Mokpo had brought shame to her family, that she would never find a husband now. But when I thought of her standing there, defiant and brave, I didn't see shame. I saw strength. Years later, when I was older, I left Iket Eshon and went to the city. I never saw Mbokpo again, but I heard stories. They said she became a teacher, that she helped other girls in the village find their voices, just like she had found hers. And every time I thought of her, I smiled. Because Mokpo wasn't just a girl in a hut. She was a storm, a river, a flame that refused to be put out.